Semester number 2, lesson number 2. Our aim today is why were immigrants drawn to the United States in the late 1800s and early 1900s? At the beginning of class, we will be reading a poem. It's called The New Colossus by Emma Lazarus, very famous, and we will be looking at that in class. So we're continuing on American society adjusting to industrialization, and a big part of industrialization and urbanization was the rise of immigration in the United States. And we're going to talk all about why the immigrants came and what their purpose was here and how they were treated. Some things we will discuss in class, so be prepared, are what are some reasons people immigrate? Why are immigrants sometimes not welcomed by certain groups of people? How do immigrants contribute to the American society? And how do you think immigrants decide where to live? So these questions will be questions that we discuss together, so be sure you're prepared to answer any of these and have a discussion on them, as well as bring in any questions that you might have. We're going to start with old immigration, which goes up until 1850. And the reasons for old immigration are fairly simple. The Irish, obviously those who come from Ireland, they came because of famine. What you guys learned last year, the potato crop was failing in Ireland and people were starving to death. A lot of them came to America in hopes of starting a new life where they are able to have, a plentiful supply of food and whatnot. Germans, they were escaping revolution. And the areas of settlement for these two groups, the Irish are going to come to large cities in the Northeast. One of the most notable cities, if you guys think about where there's a large Irish population, is Boston, which is in Massachusetts. A lot of the Germans, some come to cities, but a lot of them go to the farms and they become farmers. They do definitely face difficulties when they come. There is resentment towards Catholics and Jews. We're going to focus in on this term in more detail later on, but the term is anti-Semitism, all right? It's kind of like racism, except when you're talking about it, we're not talking about a race, we're talking about religions. And the contributions. The Irish helped build the railroads and canals, and the Germans brought new farming techniques. If you look at the picture on the right here, help wanted, no Irish need apply, very common to see these types of signs. There was a very, very well-known dislike for different immigrant groups based on just prejudice and whatnot, and we're going to talk more about that later on. So some talking points, some things we're going to discuss in class is what did many immigrants believe about America before they arrived? And why was America in some ways a disappointment to many immigrants? So you guys got to think about this a little bit. Why do you think uh, America was such a disappointment to some immigrants? So the immigration we're going to talk about in much more detail is new immigration. That immigration between 1850 and 1924. And the groups that really were involved in this are the Italians, the Polish, the Russians, the Japanese, and the Chinese. The reasons for the immigration, greater economic opportunity, and political and religious freedom. If we think about the reasons a lot of immigrants came to this country, reason number one, money and a better life, always. A lot also came to this country because they wanted their political freedom. They wanted to be able to voice their opinion. They wanted to be able to speak and vote and all these things. And some came because they wanted to be able to practice their religion freely. A lot of these people who come to America are going to live in areas that are very poor urban areas. And some people note them as the ghettos, and we're talking tenement housing, and we're going to see more about that. You guys went on that field trip. We're going to talk about that in terms of how many people were there living in one room, and was this really a better life? And we're going to discuss, in some ways, it actually was a better life. What difficulties did they face? They were losing their cultural identity, and we're going to talk about the concepts of melting pot theory and the salad theory, and were these people really losing their identity, or were they combining identities to make an American culture? And discrimination is going to be something that is very, very, very apparent in a lot of different ways, and we're going to see that. Now, these people contributed to the transcontinental railroads, coal mines, and steel mills. If you guys recall, we watched the movie America's Story of Us, and we saw the Irish and the Chinese working on the transcontinental railroad. These people were extremely important to the development of this country. So, based on the last two slides and something that we were talking about is how did people react to immigration? And I want you guys to think about how some people react to immigration today. It's very similar. All right, and on the right hand side we have a picture here. And it's a funny picture, but at the same time it shows the prejudice and the discrimination and the racism people felt towards a certain group. And the group in question here are the Italians. And it's making fun of the way in which they speak and looking at what they do to survive. And just to read it, it says, I break it a stones. I break it a stone so I can make it the money to give it to the wife, to put in a sock for a Saturday night, to pay the bill, to buy the food that'll make me strong so I can break it a stones. And, this was people in America who had been third, fourth, fifth generation Americans did not like these immigrants coming over. And these people who did not like these immigrants coming over were known as nativists. And if you look at the root word of nativist, you see native. When we think about it, who are the real nativists to this country if we really wanted to think Native Americans? However, these nativists were fourth, fifth, sixth generation Americans who were born here, and they believed that their way of life was superior to the immigrants, and they didn't want them here. They were very ethnocentric. They thought their culture was the best, and all other cultures were just not as good. And immigrants often experienced prejudice and discrimination. They were told they couldn't, go to certain places. They weren't given certain jobs. They were treated as second-class citizens. Um, Not necessarily on the same level as African Americans in the South, but similar in some ways. So look at the picture on the previous slide again, and we're going to talk about this question: how were certain immigrants viewed by American nativists? Why were they viewed that way? So if you even think about today, guys, certain groups, there's certain stereotypes. There's certain discrimination towards certain groups, stereotypes today. So why were they viewed this way? All right. Your check for understanding question for today, regions. Nativism in the late 19th century was motivated primarily by A, hostility towards immigrant workers, B, the need to reduce overcrowding in western states, C, cultural conflicts with Native American Indians, or D, the migration of African Americans to northern cities. So let's look back at the aim. All right. Why were immigrants drawn to the United States in the late 1800s and early 1900s? We are going to develop a thesis using that answer. All right. Be prepared to do a lot more of this in the second half of the year. We are going to work towards that region. We're going to develop good thesis statements, and that is where we'll end today.